Good morning, Rob. How you doing today?
I'm fine, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great. I want to welcome you to JimTalk, Moments in Leadership, where we try to come out every Thursday with a brand new guest to talk about things in moving your leadership, especially in technology careers. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to tell us about yourself.
Okay. I assume that, or I don't know whether they've seen the video on Quickett yet or not. Have they?
Uh, Say that again. I'm sorry.
Have they seen the Quickett video?
No, no, we'll put that in a
Okay, you're
second.
gonna follow. You're
So,
gonna
so
follow.
tell me
Yeah.
about the
Um,
company, and then we'll play your video.
sure. Sounds good. Um, the company that we're spinning up right now is Quickett. Uh,
Hmm.
Quickit, two T's at the end, LLC, and it was basically created to address a issue with QR. Um, the QR codes that were basically promulgated in the 1990s and 2000s and in Asia about the same time um, primarily connect you on when you scan it with your phone directly to a website. And one of the reasons I think they didn't connect in the United States was that synchronous requirement. You scan a code and it takes you to the content online. What Quickett does is it allows you to upload. We're running as a SaaS service on Amazon AWS. Is it allows you to upload any documents that you have that are in PDF format. They can be PDF's a very broad format. It can support a number of things, including color brochures and interactive forms, etc. And you can load those into a folder you create on the service, and then when the code is scanned, it prompts the scanner for their email address, and then it sends them an email which has links to all those documents. And the system records the address. It's an opt-in request, plus which documents are actually downloaded. So it's a way of
Hmm.
generating a contact sheet automatically or a contact list automatically. Um, that's the basic concept. The features of it are the fact that it is asynchronous. You can go on after you scan a code with whatever you're doing, and you can so you don't have to wait for the website to come up. And then also, it doesn't require you to have a website at all. If you've got documents that you're using to promote your company, collateral, you can just upload those PDFs to the folder, and you can then have them disseminated to the people with the different smartphones. Like for instance, the QR readers are built into most of the cameras now on smartphones. Like iPhone would be a great example. So you just hold the iPhone camera over the QR code, any QR code connected to Quickett, and it basically then prompts you for the email, and you send the email to your address. So that's the basic concept. We're developers. We developed that system, shook out all the problems with it, or we think
Hmm.
are all the problems with it. We patented it pretty aggressively about 3 or 4 years ago, and we were issued our first patent in 2019. And that was not a provisional; that was a regular patent. We filed the provisionals prior to that. We have several more coming. But anyway, that's basically the way we've commercialized it. And that's really what I've spent most of my career doing is commercializing technology, either in serial entrepreneurial startups with different companies, or as what used to be called anyway, an intrapreneur, which is
Yes.
someone that's usually in the R&D group that basically is responsible for commercializing technologies into either existing business units, new business units. And that's really where I've spent most of my life.
Well, that's great. You mentioned the video. Why don't we just take a quick look at that? It's about 2 minutes long.
Conventional QR codes just speed dial a website, which isn't bad, but a lot of your potential customers won't stop what they're doing to browse your web content. Quickett is different. It's a service that leverages traditional media advertising using smartphones, and it doesn't require a website. Quickett allows prospects to request additional information about your ads and products using their smartphones and any QR reader. They can then view that information later using their email, even the email app on their smartphones. And since you control the content that they get, you're delivering precisely the additional information that they requested, when they want it, and under their control. Quickett uses 4 easy steps. Upload the document files that you want to send to your prospects. These can be brochures in multiple languages, information about related products, catalogs, order forms, whatever you want. organize your documents into sets of document lists that you associate with your products and ads, and create Quickett QR codes that point to your lists. Now you can display your Quickett codes in your ads and on your products. That's it. You can also use multiple Quickett codes with the same document list to track which ad campaign, publication, or trade show is producing the most requests. And since Quickett codes are images, they can be used in both print and electronic display media, including TV and website graphics. As prospects request additional information by scanning your Quickett codes with their smartphones, advertisers can use Quickett's web interface to evaluate how many requests were made and which Quickett codes were used. Here you can view a timeline of when those scans were made. You can even get an email address list of who requested additional information about your product or ad. And Quickett doesn't charge per scan, only a low monthly fee for using the service. So what are you waiting for? Quickett. It's in your email.
And we're back. While that video was going, we were chatting a little bit and we said how different things are now from 5 years ago. I'm doing this whole broadcast thing in one place on my iMac, and I'm the producer, the tech guy, and the host all in one package. We couldn't do what we're doing with QR codes 5 years ago. No way.
It's absolutely the truth. I mean, we were talking earlier, and I was fortunate enough to get involved with computers very early. I went to high school down near Princeton, and we had a lot of people from Bell Labs down there. And back in the late '60s, a group of us teenagers were taken under their wing, and we were actually doing programming on teletypes related, tied into their mainframes. And we had most of the World's Fair exhibit from 1964 in the barn out back. So we were doing a lot of that work. This is before anybody had calculators. And nowadays, both the capital requirements and also the technical startup requirements are pretty straightforward. You can do things on, for instance, Quickett runs on Amazon Web Services worldwide 24/7, and they back everything up. And we get metered as a utility, and we're fully available. And your limits become really if you're doing a mobile application, the distribution of the application, and if you're doing something that's more tied to marketing, and like we're doing right now, you're basically making people aware of the application, and that's really the bottleneck now. Where it used to be, you had to raise several $1 million in capital just to spin up the software and the computer development. We were able to do that because we're developers, so we basically developed the software ourselves and just implemented it on the platforms.
Yep. It's just so different. Going to business is completely different nowadays. So let's talk about how that affects people in their technology careers. We were talking a few days ago, and you were telling me your thoughts of 3 different paths. What were they again?
Well, I've thought a lot about this since we had our conversation, and I think they still apply, but I'm not sure because I grew up in the era of vertical integration, where you went with a large company and usually had the R&D operation, and you had engineering for doing product development that was in a business unit, and they were very different. The business unit was measured one way or another by return on investment. You built a product and you put it out the door, and the dogs ate the dog food, or they didn't, and they bought the product, and you looked at the commercial return. And R&D, if it was a publicly traded company, really kind of to simplify it a lot, the company was expected to spend a percentage of their revenues on reinvest them into R&D, otherwise they weren't investing in their future. And where it went from there, it went to the CFO, and they were basically trying to look at how do you measure the return, and that was really an expense. So normally it was number of PhDs and where your lab was and how many patents you generated and things like that, but it didn't really turn into an ROI measure. Since I was usually the person inside working directly for the CFO, commercializing new technologies, my job, I felt like I was a Mission Impossible, was to find things that looked of interest in the technology that were not existing in the business unit, and to spin up commercial ventures related to those technologies. So it was really outside of the portfolio of R&D. So I ran that too. Um, the There were three kinds of things that happened. We got the best and the brightest and the strongest engineers at the time out of all Caltech and MIT and places like that. And the three paths I usually, when they first came out of school, the first question was I'd sit them down. I'd say, well, first of all, everything you know is going to be obsolete in 5 years. And of course, they'd all look at me like I didn't. I had three heads. And I said, but the most important thing you learned in all your schooling was basically learning to learn. You're basically going to teach yourself in the new technologies, which we know well, being 30 years out now with that. And then I said, there's really three paths in R&D. One is bench engineer, which is purely technical. And there, your goal is to get to probably a contributing fellow or a senior scientist or something like that. And you're working on the technical work. You're not managing people, time, or money that much. You're mostly managing yourself, and you're managing the technical work. So that's one path. It's a fairly short path. It narrows really quickly. It's hard to get to the top of that path. But God bless you. That's where a lot of you are comfortable right now because you've been doing that for most of your life. The second path is project engineering, and it's the broadest path, and it's really the one that's related to managing people, time, and money to a fixed goal. It's not an open-ended goal where it's like manage people, time, and money, and we'll tell you when you're done. It's like you have this budget, you have this time frame, you have to hit these functional objectives. Now, coordinate the project and use your PERTs and your GANTs or whatever processes you're doing to bring that project in on time. And then there's a level above that where you're managing teams and multiple projects. And then the third level that kind of comes through technical is what I would call line management. There, in addition to managing people, time, and money, which are the teams that are doing this, what you're doing is you're feeding them resources. So you're managing a stable of people that feed those teams. And that's more of a segue into the C level, which is still above, which is like trying to figure out how do you deploy the resources to achieve the projects. And then of course, behind this whole thing is the metric of how do you measure success?
Right.
What constitutes success? Usually, like I say, it's patents, but there are more sophisticated processes. One we used at a company I was at, we had a fairly large R&D portfolio, but we had several hundred projects, and when you did the analysis, what you found was that some of those projects only had a half a person on them for the whole year. So you stack rank them, and you basically look at some measure of their return, and you say, well, why am I investing time working on those projects? And you draw the line somewhere, and you say, these are the ones we're going to focus on. We used a technique which was largely borrowed from the business schools, which was the net present value. And we looked at estimates of the return, and we worked with a group out of San Francisco called the Strategic Decisions Group. It was a very good group. And basically came up with metrics. So you'd basically say, here's the project, this is what we're doing, and this is what we think it's going to be worth if it's delivered on time. And of course, that gets refined as you go forward. Right.
Well, I see these three all the time in many different types of companies and all different sizes. People come in from college, as you said, they're coders, they start coding software. Sometimes people, that's all they want to do, and they'll grow into that area, right? We might call them a principal, we might call them a fellow, but they grow into that area. Often, I see they say, okay, they grow into what we call architects. Less coding, but more designing of what's going on. Then they're good at coding, so we make them a tech lead. They're good at a tech lead, we make them a manager. And this is where often people run into problems, right? They all of a sudden need to do the people relations piece, which has never been part of their job before. And what I see happen a lot is I know what I'm doing. I got here because I know what I'm doing, so you need to do it exactly the same way. So micromanagement kind of grows out of that. You're laughing, so I guess you've seen it many times.
I've definitely seen it, and actually, what I've seen is that actually, an example, this is my partner, Dr. Kevin Hunter, who I've known for 40 years now, and worked with at a number of companies. The really good ones, basically, when they take a swing through that process, they stand up at some point and they say, "I'm never going to do that again." I don't. Maybe I might change later, but right now I don't want to manage people. I just want to manage the technology.
Yeah.
They may grow into it. They may change their mind. I mean, that happens. But flexibility is a big piece. But it's really, like I say, learning to learn and figuring out what kind of horse you are. It's like the Brits have a saying, "Horses for courses." You run certain horses on dry tracks and certain horses on wet tracks, and you have to figure out where your strengths are and play to those, especially in the early years. And you usually have to try different things and check your flexibility and decide what you like and what you don't like. But for the most part, it's a process of discovery of that individual, and I think one of the messages that management needs to bring to that is that it's okay. I mean, you can be a technical contributor for your entire career. You can get to the top of the ladder and become an expert, the world's expert in a particular narrow area. It's very akin to what happens in sciences. In engineering, it's usually more in the middle. It's like how do you do the development? One of the things we were talking about beforehand is increasingly now that things are done in an agile format, and they're also done in a rapid iteration.
Yep.
With business development, a lot of the people in business development have technical backgrounds, so they may not be the person that you want to have develop the product or develop the code, but they're definitely aware of what is capable, or what's possible, and what isn't, and that's great. Yes. Because it means you're not selling something you don't have, which has always been the bane of existence of engineers when it comes to salespeople. The sales guys will close the deal, and then you find out they don't have the product, so they have to figure out how to deliver that by deadline. Because driving the company overall is the return on investment of the dollars in. So that's just a matter of understanding and playing to your strengths, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, and as you said, people change. I know for myself, when I was originally out in programming, I said, I want to keep my hands dirty. That's what I said, right? I want to keep my hands dirty. I want to be into the technology. I don't want to be a manager. Until I reached a point where all these people were coming in from college and there was churn of that. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. I've done it. I've been there. Let me try something else. And I learned that I liked the management. I liked mentoring people and coaching people. And that really was a turning point for me in my career and pushed me more towards the line management.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Well, I mean, two observations. First of all, I don't know where you're at, but they don't let me touch code anymore. And they haven't for a long time. They basically humor me by telling me, because I can kind of figure out how it works. So they basically humor me by telling me what they're doing. But they say, for God's sake, don't touch that because you'll blow it up. So I'm strictly in the business operations and the commercialization. The second thing is that you find that even when you're doing that type of a process, you're really, I don't know how to explain it. You're really trying to illustrate where the technology can go, what the solution set is. I mean, a good example of that would be probably, I mean, it's an overused example, would probably be Steve Jobs. I mean, he had a very good understanding of what was possible with technologies, and basically also beyond the curve a little bit, like what was possible that even the engineers didn't think was possible. And he would sell ahead of the engineers. He did that all the time. From if you read any of the biographies, he was always talking to people about developing the business ahead of the engineering problem. So he was dangerous, like most are in this racket. But at the same time, he was following that strength, and for me, the crossover occurred in marketing, actually, and in marketing and sales. I crossed over to what I euphemistically described as the dark side about mid-career. Prior to that, I worked mostly large companies in their R&D lab doing commercialization. And then I got an offer, like I had a mentor at a company, the CFO, and he basically said, "You need an operating assignment," because I was thinking about going back to school and getting an MBA. I was in my late 30s. And he said, "You're too old to get an MBA. You can get an EMBA, but basically if somebody with your level of experience came to me and said they just went and got their MBA, I'd say that's a waste of time. What you really need is a rotation through an operating unit." But of course, he was politically involved because he was playing way above this at sea level, and so nobody wanted to touch me because I was his protege, right? So I had an offer from an outside company that basically said, "Hey, would you come in and commercialize this technology?" And I understood the technology pretty well, and they knew that. So that was like my MBA. That was like crossing over to the dark side in terms of how do you make money with this in the business unit as opposed to in the R&D unit. And it was a pretty successful operation. It was commercialization of PDF 417. That's the funny code on the back of your driver's license and then all your driver's windows and everything. It's on FedEx packages, and we basically knocked all those accounts down. We basically made it a real thing, and then commercialized that. And so you had two problems. One of them was you had to explain to people what a two-dimensional barcode was when they didn't know what a one-dimensional barcode was. And then the second thing you had to do explain why yours was better. those were two formidable challenges. But you learned there were different types of dialogues that were occurring between the technology and the business units, and it was really a whole new set of skills that was ranged from talking to people that had no technical knowledge to people that had deep technical knowledge. So that was the world you were then operating in, and I've been in that world since then, both on a consulting and on an operating basis.
Right. I kind of went the other route. When I was in my late 30s, I wanted to go back to school. I did do the EMBA.
Yeah, there you go.
And one of the biggest things, aha moments during that was I have to stop firefighting for my people. Instead of being their problem solver, I needed them to come to me with the problems and a recommendation. And that was a big turning point for me and how to manage people.
That's a huge thing. I mean, the part of that, the initial sit-down conversation, usually, sometimes it's not the same session, sometimes it's later, is you try to convince people, and again, this is an R&D, this is more from a technical standpoint, but you say, look, I want you to develop a problem-solving solution set in your mind. I don't want you to bring me a problem that basically says, oh, here's the problem, you fix it, because if I'm doing that, I don't need you. Right? What I want you to do is, like, if you identify a problem, bring that to me along with 3 solutions, including the one you're going to take unless I tell you otherwise. And the only reason I'm doing that is I'm not trying to second guess you. I might know something you don't know because I'm dealing with management at a different level. There's different budget issues, et cetera. So you'll learn through that process too. But if you force people to think about the problem and then the solution in the same context and then come back with a recommendation, that's an entirely different mindset than basically just looking for problems.
Right.
And it's the first glimmer when somebody comes into that, and it's funny with smart engineers that come in. You go through different stages. One of them is, hey, I can do this, and you go, yeah, but can you make money with it? And they go, I don't know. And the next stage comes back, and they go, hey, I can do this, and I can make money with it. You go, yeah, great. Well, how much money can you make? And is that more than the money you can make doing something else? And eventually, you bridge that into a risk-free rate of return discussion, where you say, yeah, I can make 8% on it, but I can get this is back in the old days. I can make 8% on it, but I can get 10% on a treasury bond, so with no risk, and I can get immediately with no cost. So why would I put the money in the project? That's just a way of getting return on investment. But that changes the thought process. It's not just solving the problem. It's also changing the way you think about what you're doing. It's a means to an end in the business environment and the technology.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I do know that when I started doing this for people, I know that I'm doing the right thing when all of a sudden I start getting emails and say, Jim, this is the problem. This is what I'm going to, these are my thoughts, this is what I'm going to do. Unless I hear from you by the end of the day, I'm just going.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's great.
And that's it, right? They're off and running.
And for good people, 80% of the time you don't have to do anything. You just basically give them an attaboy, or you basically gently shove them in the right direction. And that shows up in the review process and everything else, because you're developing a mindset in addition to the formal education.
Right.
That's, I think, I have never done it for a living, but I would think that's similar to coaching, with some of the stuff you're talking about.
Yes, well, thank you for bringing that up, since I'm an executive coach. Yeah, I do that a lot. It's a lot of asking questions and getting people to broaden their thoughts about the problem and solutions. And half the time, I find that people already know the solution. It may be buried really deep there, but they already have it. And often, from my point of view, executive coaching is often just being a sounding board.
And sometimes it's like being a therapist too, because you're giving them an opportunity, like kind of a, like the classic therapist joke is, well, how do you feel about that? Because what you're doing is you're forcing people to state something that may be internal that they don't even realize.
That's right.
That they then have to make actual, in a statement. So it's it's part of the process. You're developing the person beyond their technical skill set into their business skill set, for want of a better word, I guess.
That's 100% right. We are about 4 minutes out from ending. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like our audience to have?
Yeah, I don't know. It's I think, just to summarize what I've kind of said so far, is I would focus on first of all, understanding it's okay to be to courses for courses initially. It's like play to your strength and understand it. But then the flip side of that, they sound contradictory, but they're not really, is to maintain flexibility and to try other things and find out whether you like them or not. And it's okay not to like certain things. My wife is an artist. I can't draw to save my life. If you held a gun to my head, I couldn't draw you a picture of the cat. It's like it would be impossible. But there are certain strengths you have. Now, I could probably learn to draw pretty well, but I don't ever. It doesn't interest me. It's not something that basically makes me turns me on that way. So that flexibility, I think, is really important, in understanding where your strengths play. And then I guess the way I would look at business development is something to take away is that there's really 3 distinct phases. It's kind of like building a fire. There's the initial stage, which is where you're striking the flint and you're trying to get a spark going, and that's basically a magic trick. And then there's the second part, which is basically scaling that up. You're taking the spark that's running, adding kindling, and getting a flame going, but that will not keep you warm. And then you go to the point where you're adding, you're building the fire full range. Those are 3 distinct skill sets. I've spent most of my career on the magic trick. There are operational managers that spend all of their time banking the fire and keeping the thing running and making sure it doesn't go out at night. That's a whole different skill set. I'm familiar with it, but that's not me. And most people are good at maybe the magic trick in the middle part. Some people are only good at one. But it's understanding where you fit on that and what skill set you want. And some of that you can only find out by trying it.
So I always say experiment, experiment, experiment. And I like using the word experiment because it doesn't mean we failed at the end. Mm-hmm. Trying things and saying, well, that didn't work often leaves that failure taste. But I like to use experiment. And all we did was prove or disprove that hypothesis. We have to go back to our 5th grade science fair project, right?
That's a long time for me.
So I like what you said. Learn, learn, learn. We have to keep learning. We said a couple of times during our conversation, in 5 years, everything will be obsolete. Probably nowadays we can say 3 years instead of 5.
Yeah, it's accelerating.
And find what you really like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for coming on our show, Rob. Love to have you again.
Oh, thank you. Enjoyed it.
And I wish you the best of luck with Quickett.
Thanks very much.
You are very welcome.